Hello, everyone. My name is Saba Naqvi. I am the National Practice Leader of Immigration Services at BDO. I'd like to welcome you to On the Rise, our LinkedIn live series of events discussing the labor shortage across Canada. In each session, we'll be discussing one way in which you as business owners and leaders can tackle the current labor shortage crisis. It is my pleasure to introduce Debra Moses, Partner and Global Employer Service Leader. Deborah has over 28 years of experience in professional expatriate tax, assisting multinational companies with their globally mobile workforce. I'm going to turn it over to Deborah now, who can tell us a little bit more about how she helps Canadian businesses.
Thank you, Saba. I help employers understand how to move certain employees into specific countries. For example, if they have an office in a different country or they'd like to set up employees there. I also help employers in Canada set up and respond to remote working requests. For example, with respect to remote workers, we look to determine whether or not you have any global operations where these remote workers could be housed. If not, we need to look at each country to see what both the tax and non-tax considerations would be, such as payroll, social security, medical insurance, data privacy, etc. And as you're aware, Saba, even from an immigration standpoint, it's very important. Canada's labor scarcity has always been a challenge, but with the pandemic has expedited the problem. With an aging population, decrease in labor force participation, as well as the impacts from the pandemic. We hear from our clients all the time that they are struggling with replacing and or hiring new employees.
Deborah, I love hearing about your perspective from a tax side. As my practice deals with immigration and relocating employees, there is so much synergy between our practice areas. Now, the newly coined term, the Great Resignation, we see that everywhere now. There are two levels of the situation, both short-term imbalances caused by the pandemic, as well as the aging population, which seems to be forgotten as the major issue now. Deborah, can you share with us some experiences or stories that you've heard from clients who are dealing with this problem right now?
Sure. People are reevaluating, what they're doing, what's important to them in their lives. We've seen a number of situations where many companies are unable to find talent. We see them reviewing their human resource policies and becoming much more flexible with work arrangements, both locally and abroad. I really don't see the 5 days in an office environment as a go forward. Most of the talent that people we're looking at are looking for more balance in their personal life. We're also seeing an increase in working abroad. Therefore, there are opportunities for companies to look to other countries for employment. Companies are having to become creative and finding ways to attract and retain their talent while managing the risks of carrying on their business. We have recently worked with various professional services firms to look at specific countries where their employees have said they'd like to work and determine what the risks and what the limitations should be, such as a day count, which most people are familiar with.
Yeah, thank you, Deborah. It's a question I often see as well. Since there is such a global labor market shortage, employers really want to know options for relocation, given many employees want more flexibility in where they work from, and many employers want to hire foreign applicants to fill critical positions within their organizations as quickly as possible. So, two questions to zone in on, Deborah. Things business owners should look out for from a talent perspective, a talent retention perspective, I should say, but also from a talent attraction perspective.
Of course, I would say for sure that because you're dealing with individuals, every individual story is different. And this is what makes it difficult. You don't know exactly what's impacting them because of where they're coming from specifically and how this could impact the employer. So you need to get to know the people that you're bringing on. With that said, the first thing any employer should definitely look at, unfortunately, is the income tax. Having people travel in different places can have a significant impact. Employees could establish tax residency when they're in a different jurisdiction. And the employer should inform the employee of these potential tax implications. Some employers are looking to assist them, whereas others are leaving them on their own. On the other hand, what we're seeing is employees who have gotten stuck in their home country because of the pandemic, or they get assigned to work in a different jurisdiction, but are unable to fly, so must work from their home location, may affect employer contributions that could be due. This may affect a change in employment costs given the differences in rates and Social Security types of contributions that the employer may have to pay. Employee movement can also triggers liability, and it is the responsibility of the employer to ensure that they've confirmed their employer obligations in that specific jurisdiction. For example, whether the employer is obligated to set up a payroll. This is a big question that always comes up. They may have to set up in the new jurisdiction to handle any tax. In certain situations, it can also be a criminal offense if employers don't take the necessary steps to make sure that any overseas liabilities are reviewed and met, both from payroll and a corporate side. For example, we've seen a recent situation where in one country, the police have held employees to question them about their taxation as if they did not believe that they were paying enough tax in the local country. That's a very odd thing to happen, but it recently did happen to a client, and it's something that we have to look out for.
Yeah, that's so true. You mentioned liability and compliance with each country's requirements. The immigration landscape is very similar in that there are distinct rules that every country has when it comes to remote workers, what is permitted and what's not. Even something as simple as residency can have different meanings in different contexts, such as residence in the tax world versus residency in the immigration world. Remote working arrangements for existing employees can have a wide range of implications. But Deborah, can you also share what some of the benefits are?
Yes, for sure. It's very good that you brought up the fact that the tax and immigration residency have different definitions and laws that apply. We have seen where some companies' employees tend to think that the rules are the same or they mix them up. However, there are large differences. For example, some individuals think that if they have a proper work permit, that they are actually a tax resident as well, when in fact the rules are separate and there could be differences there. We see a lot of companies focusing their energy on better employee retention. They are adapting to the needs of their existing employees and looking at flexible work policies. As an employer, this would put you in a better position to attract new talent. You can't do the same thing over and over as it's not working what worked in the past. We have to look for a new way forward.
Right.
Additionally, by permitting remote working, this can also open up the opportunity to gain access to a wider talent pool across the globe. It's important to ensure that the policies are structured in line with the countries where you will have employees from not only a tax perspective, but also looking at immigration as well as employment law. It's important to look and make sure that everything is tied in with the countries that you're looking at going into.
Thank you, Deborah. So I want to circle back to the client story you mentioned earlier, where you helped a professional services firm look at specific countries where their employees may work and the employer as well as the employee obligations. Deborah, I want to hear from you a little bit more on what you advised this client to do and what you ended up helping them with.
Sure. We worked with a firm. It was actually a firm that had come to us to determine what the partnership, employee payroll, and employee taxation implications in various countries were. And then what we did is we looked at what the limits were there, and then we determined which countries were the ones in which that they would be willing to allow their partners or employees to remotely work. Because based on certain rules, there's implications at the partnership level, at the employee payroll level, as well as the employee taxation. So they want to make sure that everything comes together, then it is tax efficient, and they know the risks that they're willing to take. So we outlined these limits. that should be monitored. They're normally monitored by an HR team to ensure that their Canadian firm was not going offside in these different countries. We measured the risks that were involved with the limits to ensure they were not offside with the Canadian and or as well the other countries that we were looking at. These related both to corporate payroll and the employees.
Okay, so what if I'm a local Canadian business who wants to hire someone to fill a job remotely from another jurisdiction? What are some things I need to watch out for?
Well, typically, you may need to have a local office in the host country of which you're looking to hire somebody. You may also require an address registered as a subsidiary and a local bank account. These are very country specific and need to be considered for the country in question. I mean, every country has different rules on how you can operate, and it's not a one country solution, or whatever happens in Canada won't work in another country. The
Right.
next thing is having to navigate the benefits that you would offer them, any payroll, any taxes, employee taxes as well, compliance, employment and immigration laws. It's easy for a business to get in trouble when they don't comply with the local labor laws as well, especially in Europe. They have various ones.
For many employers, I'm sure this seems like such a daunting task.
Yes, it can be. However, there are ways to streamline and simplify the process. For example, we always look at the employee being hired and their responsibilities. We need to discuss with our international corporate as well as transfer pricing colleagues to ensure whatever structure that we look at to be put in place, that it is done in the most tax efficient manner. Some countries will use alternative structures, but these also need to be looked at from a Canadian perspective as well to ensure that the company is not offside in Canada. For example, there are situations where the employment relationship can be transferred, which means that there needs to be a review of any, for example, share-based equity compensation that may be offered to the employees and whether it's being taken offside. Or in a situation where they are cutting the employment relationship, then there needs to be a consideration of, the employee seniority or any pension benefits. Like, are these affected? There are definitely many non-tax issues to be considered as well.
These examples are great. I'm sure many business owners who have joined us today have some great takeaways from this information. For those who work in the finance department, I'm sure have more interest in specifically some of the taxation issues that could potentially come up. Could you cover some of those for us?
No problem. There are a number of issues, such as payroll being the number one. It tends to be the headache for most people. This is an area where many companies have issue when they're hiring an employee from outside of Canada in, or even the other way. We've seen various clients that have had to set up what we call shadow payrolls or split payrolls, which are more common in Europe. These are common to my practice area. However, many domestic companies have issues with having the structure put in place properly. Which Social Security is payable and which provincial tax might apply to these individuals. These are all things that need to be looked at before setting the person up onto the payroll. There are also transfer pricing issues that would have to be looked at to see which company should be absorbing the costs of the employee, how the employee's personal tax returns are to be completed. Are there double withholdings and or taxation? Is there any way that we're able to minimize that? How will the company compensate the employee? Like what type of pay is required in what country? We work with our clients to ensure that we minimize the tax in both of the countries that we're talking about.
It sounds like a lot can happen based on different scenarios, and it's really beneficial for any company to really stay on top of planning and organization.
Of course, there are some key preliminary planning steps up front, because when things go wrong after the fact, it has a ripple effect on all areas of employee taxation. I would say early on, do the following. Interview the employee to understand their tax residency in both countries. This normally is done by a tax professional because there is personal information that's involved. and determine can the company apply for what we call a certificate of coverage, which would allow them to pay into Social Security in their home country where they're coming from, or vice versa. It has to depend on whether there is one available. Does the other country have additional payments that may be required under their local employment laws? Such as in Europe, there's a 13-month payment. However, in Spain, they have a 14-month payment, meaning that there's an additional compensation payment in the summer and another one in December. Which country is to set up the payroll, or is it a split payroll to maintain them in some of their home country benefits, such as in France, they have very specific benefits that most of their individuals would prefer to stay in. However, if providing services in Canada, then there's also the Canadian payroll to be looked at. So it's mixing the two together and making sure it's done so that the company is compliant in Canada and that everything is, that they're not double paying things. This is also only from the employee perspective. However, we would also have to look at the corporate structure to ensure that it's not creating any corporate tax issues for the company of having the employees come in or working outside of Canada.
Deborah, how would you say BDO fits into this process?
Well, I would say we play many roles in this process. My specific service line deals with the employee issue from an employer's perspective. We also look at compensation plans, such as any type of equity and how it is treated in different countries. We work closely with our global network to get both sides of every story. We also require the assistance of our international corporate tax group, indirect tax, as well as our transfer pricing group. It's necessary to allow us to provide a comprehensive advice. And of course, Saba, we need you for our immigration issues.
I'm happy to help anytime.
Good.
Well, thank you so much, Deborah. You've provided a great starting point for someone who's looking to hire an employee from overseas. Now let's move on to some questions from the audience. Which countries have the least stringent policies or laws when it comes to hiring talent?
That's a very difficult question to answer because there's not only one policy or law that we're looking at. So that's why it's really important that we look at each country specifically, because even if there's not a tax in that country, there could be other types of rules that come in. There's the employment law that has to come into it. There could be Social Security. There could be a way that you have to pay somebody. Even coming in from an immigration perspective. I mean, each country has their own very specific rules. So it's not easy to say which one has the least stringent. I haven't come across one that has been easier than the other. They're all different with their own, I don't want to say complications, but with their own specialties, shall I say.
Yeah, no, definitely. I can relate to that because even from an immigration perspective, it really depends on each individual's circumstances and how the law applies. And, you know, there's some easier ways and some more challenging, but it is just a matter of navigating all of the rules and requirements.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, is there a general rule of thumb on how long an employee can work in a country without being taxed within the jurisdiction?
Each country is specific, but a lot of people talk about this 183 day. I mean, that's very specific to certain countries. And
Yes.
it could be, it's not necessarily that each one falls into place. What we've seen is some companies, when they're trying to move people into different countries, they want to have a de minimis type test is what they want to say. Okay, we're not going to do anything if it's 10 days or 20 days, but these are our limits. That what we have to do is we have to talk to the client, to the corporate client, and explain to them what the risks are, and then they can take it upon themselves. It's not something that we can naturally say. It depends upon what the company is willing to do and the limit that they would take.
Great, thank you. Deborah, what are some countries that you often work within, or have you had a lot of success acquiring talent in, or your clients, I should say?
I find that what I've seen a lot is there's a lot of people coming from the UK. We have a lot of people coming from the UK, probably from a language perspective that it's coming in.
Yeah.
I would say that's the country that I've seen the most of people coming into Canada right now. It's more, it kind of sticks out in my mind. And Australia as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, this is actually, there's another question. What do you find the biggest challenge when you're advising clients on these kinds of tax matters?
I think the one that always surprises me and surprises clients a lot is the payroll question, because some people coming into Canada, like companies coming into Canada normally know, or companies that are in Canada are familiar with the Canadian rules, but when you're bringing somebody from outside Canada in, there's a little bit more of a complication in it. And what I find is there's sometimes what we're seeing is people coming into Canada to bring people in, and that tends to be the issue that they have, because our payroll rules are much stricter than other countries within Canada. So it tends, how are they getting them set up?
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Are there any risks that clients need to consider before looking into hiring global talent?
I think the risks, again, like aside from the tax risks that we talked about, it's more on like, how are we bringing them into Canada? You have to look at the Canadian employment law and what it is that you would have to pay them and how you pay them. With this, I think it's more on how to structure the people coming into Canada. From sometimes a lot of people for example, in the US, they say they're independent contractors. And
Right.
Canadian companies say, okay, we're going to bring them in as an independent contractor, when in fact, they're an actual employee, because the rules with independent contractor and employees are very different between the US and Canada. Our Canadian rules are much stricter. So these are some of the risks that you need to look into, besides some of the things that I brought up.
Perfect.
Before.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone for joining this On the Rise session on acquiring global talent. And we want to remind you that today's event is the second session out of 3. So stay tuned, as next time we will be covering our next topic on digitizing your business. Now, BDO has a global employer services team that covers 4 different categories, including services for all aspects of an assignment: business traveler management, customized payroll solutions, and global equity. If you have any questions or would like to speak with Deborah directly, please feel free to reach out to our team at bdoentrepreneur@bdo.ca. We will drop a link in the comment section to the next session on March 30th. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.